On the morning of March 30, 1896, a bargeman was floating down the River Thames near Reading when he spotted something caught in the reeds. A parcel. Brown paper, tied with string, bobbing gently in the water. He hooked it with his pole. Dragged it to the side of his boat. Cut the string. Inside, wrapped in layers of linen and newspaper, was the body of a baby girl. She couldn't have been more than 15 months old. Her skin was gray. Her tiny hands were curled into fists. And around her neck, tied twice, knotted under her left ear, was a length of white dressmaking tape. She had been strangled. Wrapped like a package. And thrown away like rubbish. The bargeman called the police. And what they discovered over the following weeks would expose one of the most horrifying crimes in British history. Because this wasn't the only baby in the river. Over the next month, police would drag 6 more tiny bodies from the Thames. All strangled. All wrapped in parcels. All with the same white tape around their necks. And they would all lead back to the same woman. A woman who had been murdering children, for money, for over 30 years. Her name was Amelia Dyer. The newspapers would call her the Ogress of Reading. But she wasn't alone. She was just the worst of hundreds. Part of a system so horrific, so widespread, that the police said finding a dead baby in the streets of London was no more remarkable than finding a dead dog. This is the story of the Victorian baby farms. Where thousands of children vanished. Where desperate mothers paid to have their babies cared for. And where the truth was so monstrous that history tried to forget it ever happened. To understand how baby farming existed, how it was allowed to flourish for decades, you have to understand what it meant to be an unmarried mother in Victorian England. It meant ruin. Complete and total ruin. In 1834, Parliament passed the Poor Law Amendment Act. This single piece of legislation created the conditions for everything that followed. Before 1834, if a woman became pregnant outside of marriage, she could legally pursue the father for financial support. The parish would help enforce it. The father had obligations. The Poor Law changed that. Under the new law, all financial responsibility for illegitimate children fell on the mother alone. Fathers could walk away. Fathers did walk away. And the women were left with nothing. No job, because employers wouldn't hire a woman with a bastard child. No housing, because landlords wouldn't rent to her. No workhouse, because many refused to admit unmarried mothers, viewing them as morally contaminated. The message was clear: if you had sex outside marriage, you deserved to suffer. You and your child both. And so, across Victorian England, a desperate economy emerged. They called it baby farming. The term was an insult. It implied something agricultural, mechanical, raising children like livestock for profit. But for the women who used these services, it was often the only option between survival and the streets. Here's how it worked. A woman, usually young, usually poor, usually seduced and abandoned, would place an advertisement in a newspaper. Wanted, respectable woman to take young child. Sometimes she'd pay a weekly fee for ongoing care. Sometimes she'd pay a lump sum for adoption. And women would answer these ads. Some were genuine. Kind women who wanted children, who would raise these babies as their own, who gave them real homes and real love. But others saw something else entirely. They saw profit. A lump sum of £10, about 3 months' wages for a working woman, to take a baby off someone's hands. The mother would disappear, relieved and grateful. And then, what? The math was simple. If you kept the baby alive, you had to feed it, clothe it, house it. £10 wouldn't last long. But if the baby died, you kept the money. And you answered the next advertisement. The worst part wasn't that baby farming existed. The worst part was that everyone knew. Newspapers published articles about it. Doctors raised alarms. In 1866, a reformer named Mrs. Baines told the Journal of Social Sciences that police think no more of finding the dead body of a child in the streets than of picking up a dead cat or dog. In 1870 alone, 276 dead infants were found abandoned in the streets of London. 276. In one city. In 1 year. And those were just the ones they found. Bodies turned up everywhere. Under railway seats. In sewers. In canals. In doorways and alleyways and ash pits. Some were newborns, discarded by desperate mothers. But many showed signs of having lived for weeks or months, fed just enough to stay alive while the payments came in, then disposed of when the money stopped. The police knew. The doctors knew. Parliament knew. And for decades, they did almost nothing. Why? Because the alternative was unthinkable. Regulating baby farms meant acknowledging that illegitimate children existed. It meant the government intervening in family matters, something Victorians considered sacred and private. It meant admitting that their society, their moral crusade against sexual impropriety, had created conditions where murdering babies was profitable. So they looked away. And the baby farms kept operating. In January 1896, a 25-year-old barmaid named Evelina Marmon gave birth to a daughter. She named the baby Doris. Evelina was not married. The father, whoever he was, is not recorded on the birth certificate. He had disappeared, as fathers so often did. And Evelina was alone. She had no family to help her. Her mother had died when Evelina was 15. Her father followed 5 years later. Her siblings had scattered, married, moved away. At 25, Evelina Marmon was completely, utterly alone, with a newborn baby and a job serving drinks at the Plough Hotel in Cheltenham. She couldn't keep Doris and keep working. The hotel wouldn't allow it. And without work, she couldn't afford to feed either of them. So Evelina did what thousands of women before her had done. She placed an advertisement in the Bristol Times and Mirror, "Wanted, respectable woman to take young child." A few days later, she received a reply. The letter was warm. Reassuring. It came from a Mrs. Harding, in Reading, who wrote that she and her husband were a respectable married couple with no children of their own. They wanted to adopt a baby girl. They had a nice country home. They would love Doris as their own. The fee was £10. A one-time payment. And then Doris would have a family. Evelina hesitated. She wanted to pay a weekly fee instead, something that would keep her connected to Doris, allow her to reclaim her daughter someday when she was back on her feet. Mrs. Harding refused. It had to be the full amount, paid in advance. Evelina had no other options. On March 31, 1896, she traveled to Cheltenham Station with Doris in her arms and a cardboard box of baby clothes. Mrs. Harding was already there, waiting. Evelina would later describe her in court. An older woman. Heavier than expected. Not quite what she'd imagined from the letters. But she was kind to Doris. Affectionate. She held the baby gently and spoke to her in soft tones. Evelina handed over her daughter. She handed over £10. She handed over the box of clothes. And then she watched Mrs. Harding walk away with her baby. She would see Doris one more time. 11 days later. On a mortuary slab. Mrs. Harding was a lie. Her real name was Amelia Dyer. She was 57 years old. She had been killing babies for over 30 years. When Amelia Dyer took baby Doris from Evelina Marmon, she did not travel to a nice country home in Reading. She took a train to Willesden, in North London, where her daughter Polly lived. That same evening, in Polly's cramped lodgings, Amelia Dyer took out a length of white dressmaking tape. She wound it twice around Doris's neck. And she pulled. Later, in her confession, Dyer would describe what she did next with chilling detachment. "I used to like to watch them with the tape around their neck," she told police. But it was soon all over with them. Doris Marmon was 4 months old. The next day, Dyer collected another baby, 13-month-old Harry Simmons. His mother had also answered an advertisement. She had also paid £10. She had also believed her son was going to a loving home. There wasn't any fresh tape in the house. So Dyer unwound the tape from Doris's neck, from the corpse of the baby she had strangled the day before, and used it to strangle Harry. She put both bodies in a carpet bag. She weighted the bag with bricks. And she took it to a spot she knew well, near Caversham Lock on the River Thames. She pushed the bag through the railings. And she walked away. Amelia Dyer made one mistake. The parcel she had thrown into the river 3 days earlier, the one containing Helena Fry, another victim, hadn't sunk properly. A bargeman found it. And when police examined the wrapping paper, they found something Dyer had overlooked. A name and address, faintly visible in the corner, Mrs. Thomas, 26, Piggott's Road, Reading. Mrs. Thomas was another of Dyer's aliases. And Piggott's Road was her former address. The police began to trace her. They discovered she had moved, frequently, obsessively, changing names and addresses every few months. But they found her new location, Kensington Road, Reading. On April 3, 1896, officers entered Amelia Dyer's home. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The house reeked of decomposition. The smell hit them the moment they opened the door, that sweet, rotting stench that anyone who has encountered it never forgets. They found piles of baby clothes. Mountains of them. Tiny dresses, tiny bonnets, tiny shoes, far more than any legitimate caregiver would need. They found pawn tickets. Dozens of them. Dyer had been selling the baby's clothes for extra profit. They found letters. Stacks of correspondence from desperate mothers, asking about their children. How is my baby? Is she eating well? When can I visit? The letters had never been answered. They found vaccination certificates, proof that babies had been placed in her care. 20 children at least had passed through this house in the past few months alone. But they found no babies. Not one. Police ordered the Thames to be dragged. Over the following weeks, they pulled 6 more bodies from the river. All infants. All strangled with white tape. 3 boys and 3 girls, ranging from a few months old to over a year. When confronted with the evidence, Amelia Dyer said something that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. "You'll know all mine by the tape around their necks." Amelia Dyer had been baby farming since the 1860s. She started legitimately, or something close to it. She took in babies for payment, fed them as little as possible, dosed them with laudanum to keep them quiet, and waited for them to die of natural causes. It was the standard practice among the worst baby farmers. Slow starvation, masked as neglect. In 1879, a doctor became suspicious of how many infants were dying in her care. She was convicted of neglect and sentenced to 6 months hard labor. When she got out, she changed her approach. She stopped waiting for the babies to starve. That took too long. It drew attention. Instead, she began strangling them. Quickly. Efficiently. Usually within hours of receiving them. She stopped using doctors to certify deaths. That created records. Instead, she disposed of the bodies herself, in rivers, in canals, in parcels left on trains and in railway stations. And she never stayed in one place long enough to be caught. Over 3 decades, she moved constantly, using dozens of aliases: Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Harding, Mrs. Stanfield, Mrs. Smith. By the time suspicious mothers or authorities tracked down one address, she was already gone. The police estimated that at least 20 children had been placed in her care in the few months before her arrest. But Dyer had been operating for 30 years. Modern historians believe she may have murdered over 400 babies. 400. That would make her one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. More than Jack the Ripper. More than almost anyone. And she did it in plain sight. Answering advertisements in newspapers. Collecting payments through the post. Operating a business of death that everyone knew existed but no one stopped. Here's what makes this story truly unforgivable. They tried to stop it. They passed laws. They held investigations. They made speeches in Parliament. And the baby farmers kept killing. After Margaret Waters became the first baby farmer to hang in 1870, convicted of murdering at least 16 infants through starvation and laudanum poisoning, Parliament finally acted. The Infant Life Protection Act of 1872 required anyone caring for more than one infant under the age of 1 to register with local authorities. It was a start. But it was riddled with loopholes. The law only applied to children under 1 year old. Baby farmers simply kept children until they turned 1, then disposed of them. The law only applied to people caring for more than one child. Baby farmers simply took one child at a time. The law required registration, but there was almost no enforcement. Police had no resources to inspect. Local authorities had no power to intervene. A baby farmer could operate for years without anyone checking whether the children in her care were alive or dead. The law was a gesture. Nothing more. Between 1872 and 1896, the 24 years between Margaret Waters' execution and Amelia Dyer's arrest, baby farming continued unabated. Bodies kept appearing in rivers and railway stations. Advertisements kept running in newspapers. Mothers kept paying. Babies kept dying. After Dyer's trial, Parliament passed the Infant Life Protection Act of 1897. It extended protections to children up to 5 years old. It required registration for anyone caring for even one child for payment. It created infant life protection visitors with power to inspect homes. But exemptions remained. Loopholes remained. Enforcement remained weak. It wasn't until the Children Act of 1908, 12 years after Dyer's execution, that meaningful protections were finally put in place. 12 more years. How many more children died in those 12 years? We'll never know. Because no one was counting. Amelia Dyer went on trial at the Old Bailey on May 22, 1896. She was charged with a single murder, that of baby Doris Marman. The prosecution had 6 more bodies and evidence of at least 20 children placed in her care, but they only needed one conviction. One was enough to hang her. Her defense was insanity. She had been committed to mental asylums multiple times throughout her life. She exhibited strange behaviors, singing hymns obsessively, preaching to other prisoners, claiming to hear voices. The prosecution argued that her breakdowns always conveniently coincided with times when her crimes were about to be discovered. That her insanity was performed. That she was calculating, not mad. The jury deliberated for 4.5 minutes. Guilty. On the morning of June 10, 1896, Amelia Dyer was led to the gallows at Newgate Prison. She was 57 years old, heavy-set, unremarkable. The kind of woman you might pass on the street without a second glance. The executioner asked if she had any last words. "I have nothing to say," she replied. The trapdoor opened at 9 a.m. exactly. The newspapers reported that her death was instantaneous and infinitely more merciful than the slow strangulation which she practiced. After Amelia Dyer was executed, the residents of Reading did something unusual. They went to Clapper's footbridge, the wooden walkway that crossed the Thames near where the babies had been found, and they carved crosses into the handrail. Small marks. Easy to miss. A quiet memorial to the children who have been thrown away like rubbish. The bridge has been replaced since then. The crosses are gone. There is no official memorial to Dyer's victims anywhere in Reading or in Britain. 7 bodies were recovered from the Thames in 1896. Only 3 were ever identified: Doris Marman, Harry Simmons, and Helena Fry. The other 4 remain nameless to this day. We don't know who their mothers were. We don't know what names they were given in the brief weeks or months they were alive. We don't know who held them, who fed them, who kissed them goodnight before handing them to a stranger at a railway station. They existed. They lived. They were loved, however briefly, by someone. And then they were erased. Doris Marmon and Harry Simmons were buried together in Reading Old Cemetery. The woman who killed them within hours of each other now shares the same ground, somewhere in an unmarked grave, her exact resting place deliberately lost. Evelina Marmon, Doris's mother, identified her daughter's body 11 days after handing her to Mrs. Harding. She was brought to the police station. She was shown the tiny corpse wrapped in white tape. She was in perfect health when I sent her away, was all she could say. She had wanted to believe. She had needed to believe. And that need, that desperate, human need to hope, had cost her everything. 400 children. That's the estimate. Some say more. The true number will never be known because Amelia Dyer operated for 30 years, changing names and addresses, covering her tracks, and no one was watching closely enough to count. 400 children who were wanted by someone. Who were given away in hope, not cruelty. Whose mothers believed they were giving them a chance at a better life. 400 small bodies, strangled with dressmaking tape, wrapped in parcels, thrown into rivers like garbage. And Dyer wasn't alone. Margaret Waters. Ada Chard Williams. Amelia Satch and Annie Walters. Rhoda Willis. The baby farmer was a Victorian profession, an industry built on shame and poverty and the monstrous mathematics of profit. Some were caught. Most were not. How many baby farmers operated in Victorian England? How many children passed through their hands? How many tiny graves hold no names because no one ever came looking? We don't know. History erased them. Just like the baby farmers did. The last baby farmer to be executed in Britain was Rhoda Willis, hanged in Wales in 1907. By then, the world was changing. Adoption laws were tightening. Social stigma around illegitimacy was, slowly, painfully, beginning to lift. The conditions that had made baby farming profitable were starting to disappear. But the children who died in those farms, the thousands upon thousands whose names we'll never know, they don't get to see that change. They only get this. A story told a century too late. A reminder that they existed. And a question that should keep us awake at night. What are we not seeing today? If this story made you feel something, rage, grief, disbelief, I need you to leave a comment and tell me what hit you hardest. And if this is your first time here, Soot and Silk tells the stories of the forgotten. The children who vanished. The mothers who were blamed. The systems that failed them all. Subscribe if you want to remember them with me. Because someone should.